In the age of pharaohs, whispers of the mummies. They called themselves gods, yet they lived in fear of death. The pharaohs raised monuments taller than memory, carved their names into stone, and filled their tombs with treasures to outlast eternity. But stone erodes, gold is stolen, and power collapses, only the mummies remain. Wrapped in silence, they whisper across the centuries, not of glory, but of truths so unbearable that history itself tried to seal them shut. What you are about to read is not their story, but their residue, the forbidden knowledge embalmed with their flesh, knowledge that was never meant to awaken. The throne that outlives the body. You imagine pharaohs as kings, but kings die. Pharaohs did not. At least that is what they needed you to believe. Their power was not anchored in politics, nor in armies of bronze and chariots, but in the slow erosion of your ability to distinguish man from God. They were not rulers of land, but of perception. Every monument, every ritual, every carefully orchestrated myth was designed to carve a single conviction into the mind of their subjects. The pharaoh is eternal, and you are dust. Think of it, a man of flesh who bleeds like you, hungers like you, fears death as you do, yet he stands before you as raw incarnate, Horus made flesh. The machinery of temples, priests, hymns, and hieroglyphs all converge to hammer this hallucination into being. If a million eyes stare at a mortal until they agree he is divine, what is he then? Does he not become the very thing belief has sculpted? Or is he still only a man drowning in the mask of eternity? Their divinity was not just political, it was neurological. The human brain, fragile and malleable, cannot withstand constant suggestion. Repeat a lie long enough and the lie becomes memory. Reinforce it with ritual, architecture, and spectacle and it becomes biology. Neuroscience today calls it neuroplasticity. The priests of ancient Egypt mastered it thousands of years ago. They rewired perception itself, implanting into the people a circuit where obedience equaled survival and disbelief equaled death, not just of the body but of the soul. The pyramids themselves were not merely tombs but instruments. Vast geometries rising against the desert horizon, impossible in scale, they were designed to fracture the scale of identity. You look up and your own body shrinks, you enter and silence smothers your voice, you wander the corridors and even your sense of time falters. This is not architecture, it is a sensory experiment, a manipulation of human cognition centuries before psychology gave it a name. The pharaoh's throne was not a seat but a mechanism, an illusion machine generating divinity from stone. But even illusions rot, empires crumble, dynasties dissolve, names vanish from memory. The pharaohs built to outlast time, yet time laughed at them. Their temples collapsed, their idols were shattered, their people forgot. What endured was not the man, not the empire, but the husk, the preserved corpse, the mummy, bound and hidden in darkness. Stripped of their glory, the pharaohs became the very thing they feared most, a fragile body awaiting the curiosity of strangers. And yet within those wrapped remains a paradox lingers. The body should be dead, inert, meaningless. But preservation is not passive. To preserve is to insist on survival. To embalm is to declare war on time. Every bandage, every resin, every ritual was an act of defiance against the collapse of the self. In this, the pharaohs achieved something no empire could. They turned their bodies into texts. Each mummy is a manuscript written in flesh, inked with chemicals, footnoted in amulets, sealed with prayers. You do not look at a corpse when you gaze at them. You look at a book, and like all books, they whisper. Their whispers are not words, but distortions, half-remembered myths, broken rituals, the residue of a consciousness that tried too hard to persist. Scientists today open tombs and call it archaeology. But what is archaeology if not the reading of forbidden texts? Every sarcophagus cracked open is a page torn from the hidden library. Every unraveling of linen, a desecration of a manuscript that was meant never to be touched again. We say we study history. What if instead history is studying us, through the eyes that were sealed but never fully shut? The illusion of pharaohs still works, but inverted. Where once they demanded awe through divinity, now they demand terror through silence. You stand before their mummified faces and feel it, the uncanny, the unresolved, the wrongness of a body that refuses to decay. Somewhere inside your mind whispers, this is not natural, this is not allowed, but you look anyway, you cannot stop. And in your gaze, their divinity reawakens. The pharaoh is eternal and you are dust. But tell me, if the power of a god can be manufactured by stone, ritual, and suggestion, then what separates a pharaoh from a hallucination you were forced to believe? And if their preserved silence still alters you centuries later, then who is the illusion, the pharaoh or you? The body that refuses to die. Death was supposed to end everything. Flesh rots, memory dissolves, the body feeds worms, and the soul drifts into myth. But the Egyptians made war on this inevitability. They dissected death like a problem, not a fate. And in their refusal to submit, they created one of the most unsettling technologies humanity has ever known, mummification. It was not ritual alone, it was chemistry. Natron salts stripped the body of moisture, resin sealed the flesh against decay, linen bandages suffocated bacteria, amulets inserted between folds redirected invisible forces. Piece by piece, organ by organ, the body was dismantled and reassembled into something neither living nor dead. When priests slid the brain out through the nostrils, they were not simply desecrating, they were editing. Memory erased, identity rewritten, selfhood abandoned. When the heart was weighed, it was not moral judgment but measurement, an experiment in quantifying the essence of being. Consider this: modern forensic science confirms that Egyptian mummies retained cellular structures intact for thousands of years. DNA, proteins, even microscopic details of disease and diet remain. The pharaohs, perhaps unknowingly, created a biological archive. Every mummy is a hard drive, every bandage a layer of encryption, every sealed coffin a vault of data. We treat them as corpses, but they are closer to storage devices. Archaeologists think they read history by examining them, but what if the reverse is true? What if the preserved body is an experiment designed to outlast its observers, a living question aimed at us across millennia? Psychologically, mummification was violence turned inward. Imagine believing that your body could never be allowed to vanish, that every cut and extraction was necessary to sculpt you into permanence. To be immortal, you first had to be destroyed. The person was not preserved, the person was murdered and then rewritten. Every pharaoh who underwent the process ceased to exist as a man and became instead a text, edited, redacted, embalmed, and sealed for eternity. Death was no longer a biological fact, but a controlled transformation. This act echoes today in science that terrifies us. Cryonics, freezing bodies to await future revival. Plastination, turning flesh into permanent specimens. Genetic cloning, extracting life from fragments of cells. Each is an echo of the same impulse: deny death, manipulate the body, carve a new form of immortality. But while we see these practices as cutting edge, they are shadows of something ancient. The Egyptians had already walked this corridor. They had already crossed the line between corpse and artifact, life and object, body and symbol. And what do you feel when you stand before a mummy? Not reverence, not simple curiosity, but discomfort. Your skin crawls because the categories no longer hold. It is dead yet not gone. It has no voice yet still speaks. The paradox tears at your perception. Neuroscientists call this the uncanny valley, the psychological shudder we feel when something is almost alive but not quite. The Egyptians engineered the uncanny on purpose. They weaponized it. Every visitor to the tomb was meant to collapse under this dissonance. What you call horror today, they called eternity. But if the body can be turned into text, if flesh can be preserved as data, if death can be edited, what then is life? Is it the beating heart or the persistence of form? Is it consciousness or the illusion of it continuing? The pharaoh's silence was not passive. Their mummies whisper the question still. You stand before them and feel time bend. They died 3,000 years ago, and yet they stand closer to you than your own ancestors, their faces intact, their fingerprints unrotted, their very hair gleaming under museum lights. Who died then, them or you, whose body will vanish into soil within decades while theirs persists across centuries? So I ask you, when preservation outlives decay and the dead outlast the living, who is truly alive and who has already begun to rot? The architecture that thinks. The pharaohs told you their tombs were houses for eternity, but that was a lie. A tomb is not a home. A tomb is an instrument. Walk its corridors and you will feel it. The stone does not shelter, it manipulates. The geometry bends thought, the silence edits memory, the scale fractures identity. You do not explore the pyramid, it explores you. Step into the passageway. Light vanishes, swallowed into walls angled with precision. Your voice tries to return to you but comes back distorted, slower, stretched, as if the stone itself is misremembering what you said. The longer you wander, the more your perception collapses. Time slows, distances elongate, orientation slips. What you call disorientation is not an accident, it is design. The pyramid was not a static monument, it was a laboratory of the mind. Modern psychology has terms for this: sensory deprivation, echo distortion, cognitive dissonance. Studies confirm that isolation in soundproof chambers fractures thought, distorts memory, and induces hallucination. The priests of the Nile did not need laboratories, they had corridors of stone. The pyramid was an ancient version of the Rosenhin experiment or the Gonsfeld effect: manipulate the senses and you can rewrite the mind. Scale was its own form of violence. The outer walls soared higher than comprehension, dwarfing the body until you shrank inside yourself. Neuroscientists today call this the overview effect, a cognitive shift astronauts report when they see Earth from orbit, overwhelmed by scale, identity dissolving into insignificance. The Egyptians engineered the same collapse, not with planets but with stone. To stand before the pyramid was to become smaller than thought itself. To enter was to surrender entirely. And what of silence? Inside the tomb, silence is not absence but presence. It presses against your ears like weight. You begin to hear your own blood, your own nervous system, the machinery of your own body amplified against the void. Silence is not empty, it is invasive. Experiments show that prolonged silence triggers auditory hallucinations, whispers, footsteps, voices from nowhere. The tomb was designed to weaponize this. The pharaoh may be dead, but in silence his whisper lives. Archaeologists speak of trapped tunnels and hidden chambers. But traps are not always physical. The true trap was psychological. The tomb rewrote perception until intruders could not distinguish their own thoughts from the pharaoh's curse. You could emerge alive yet altered, carrying not treasure but contamination of the mind. Think of this: the pyramid is brain. Its corridors are neural pathways, its chambers synapses, its echoes electrical signals. To walk inside was to enter a model of consciousness itself. Perhaps that was the point, not merely to preserve the body but to preserve a map of the mind. The pharaoh's tomb was not for him. It was for you, the one who would come later, the one who would wander, the one who would collapse. And if that is true, then consider what it means. Every pyramid is still active. Every visitor who enters is not just observing history but participating in an experiment older than memory. Every step, every breath, every shiver of disorientation is data. You are the subject, you are the continuation of the pharaoh's science. So tell me, when the architecture itself begins to think through you, when stone reshapes your mind as if you were clay, can you still claim the thoughts you leave with are your own? The curse that writes the body. When archaeologists first broke the seals of royal tombs, newspapers reported death after death. Lord Carnarvon, financier of Tutankhamun's excavation, died from a trivial infection soon after entering the chamber. Others followed: fever, heart failure, accidents. The public called it a curse. Science called it coincidence. But what is coincidence when a pattern continues long enough to erode disbelief? What you call a curse may be nothing more and nothing less than suggestion weaponized into biology. The Egyptians understood belief as force. To inscribe a curse upon the tomb wall was not empty poetry but precise engineering. Words were not symbols, they were commands. Read them and they infect thought, believe them and they rewrite flesh. The brain cannot distinguish between suggestion and reality when the body responds. This is not superstition, it is documented psychology. Take the nocebo effect, the inverse of placebo. Placebo heals through expectation, nocebo kills through fear. In controlled experiments, patients convinced they had been poisoned displayed real symptoms, even death, despite ingesting harmless substances. Belief sculpted reality. Now transpose this onto a tomb. You descend into silence, read the warning carved into stone, feel the weight of 3,000 years pressing upon your nerves. Fear amplifies, expectation metastasizes. You leave convinced you are cursed, and soon enough your body obeys. The pharaohs embedded nocebo into architecture. The curse was not merely written, it was staged. Darkness, silence, echoes, the sight of preserved flesh, each element was a stimulus designed to pierce the psyche. Neuroscience calls it priming, the process by which the environment loads the brain with expectations that direct outcome. You expected death, so you received it. The pharaoh was long gone, yet his reach extended through your own biology. But perhaps it was not only psychological. Studies reveal toxic molds, ancient bacteria, even radioactive elements lingering in tombs. To open a sarcophagus was to inhale spores and chemicals sealed for millennia. Science explains the deaths with pathogens, but pause, why assume this is accidental? The Egyptians understood herbs, resins, poisons. They embalmed with arsenic, mercury, bitumen. They knew their substances endured. What if the curse was dual: belief for the mind, toxins for the body, a fusion of psychology and chemistry, a hybrid of illusion and reality? And here lies the deeper horror. It worked not only on tomb robbers but on civilizations. The legend of the curse spread across continents, across centuries. Even those who never stepped into a pyramid began to fear. Collective imagination itself became infected. To fear the pharaoh was to obey him still. The curse became not localized but viral, a meme that survived when dynasties did not. Think of it: you stand before a wall of hieroglyphs that say, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs this tomb." Do you laugh, or does some hidden organ within you recoil? If language can induce panic, if fear can trigger death, then what separates inscription from execution? Modern medicine records cases of individuals who willed themselves to die. No trauma, no poison, only belief. They believed they were dying, and so they did. If death can be written into the nervous system through expectation, then the pharaohs were not priests or kings, but the earliest neuroscientists. They understood that to command a mind is to command a body, and to command a body is to command reality itself. But if words can kill across centuries, if belief can sculpt biology, if a curse whispered once can echo through the veins of strangers not yet born, then tell me, what protects you now as you read these words? The pages that refused to burn. We remember pharaohs through stone, but their true empire was paper, fragile papyrus, ink pressed into fibers, knowledge wound into scrolls. Stone monuments broadcast power to the masses, scrolls whispered secrets to the initiated. Yet where are these writings now? What remains is fragment, ash, rumor. Knowledge erased not by time, but by hands that feared it. The Library of Alexandria, flames rising against the night sky. We are told it was accident, misfortune, the carelessness of conquerors, but do not believe in accidents that convenient. What perished there was not simple history but continuity. Egyptian mathematics, medicine, alchemy, astronomy, maps of the body and the heavens aligned. Texts that blurred the line between science and sorcery. Pages that spoke of the body as vessel, the soul as frequency, the universe as a resonance chamber. Pages that would have collapsed the narrative of empire and church alike had they endured. Even the fragments that survive are radioactive. The Book of the Dead is not a myth but a manual, a guidebook for navigating consciousness beyond the flesh. The coffin texts describe reality as layered fields, overlapping dimensions, the soul migrating across them like a traveler across rooms. The pyramid texts are older still, instructions carved into stone for the king's resurrection, not metaphorical but literal. You call it mythology only because the scrolls that explain the methods were destroyed. But suppression always leaves residue. In the Gnostic Gospels discovered at Nag Hammadi, we find echoes of Egyptian thought: the body as prison, salvation as gnosis, the divine not above but within. These were banned, buried, declared heresy. Why? Because they collapse control. A pharaoh is divine if only he has the secret, but if every human body is a temple, if every soul is already eternal, then empire evaporates. Power feeds on scarcity. Knowledge made common is knowledge made dangerous. Consider the Hermetic texts attributed to Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom. As above, so below, a sentence so simple yet corrosive. It collapses the distinction between heaven and earth, between ruler and ruled. To accept it is to dethrone not only pharaohs but gods themselves. No wonder the Hermetica was hidden, smuggled, preserved in fragments. No wonder alchemists whispered of it in Europe centuries later as forbidden scripture. And so the scrolls were burned, scattered, sealed in caves. Knowledge displaced from continuity into fragments, requiring initiation to decode. But perhaps this was deliberate. Perhaps the Egyptians themselves understood that preservation is inseparable from danger, that to keep the body intact you must bind it in linen and bury it in silence, that to keep knowledge intact you must scatter it, encrypt it, hide it beneath layers of myth. The mummy and the manuscript are the same, wrapped, concealed, resistant to decay, whispering only to those who dare to violate them. And here you are reading. Do you think the destruction failed or succeeded? If knowledge survives only as shards, requiring obsession, secrecy, and descent into darkness to retrieve, is that not the purest form of preservation? What is more enduring, a text available to all, or a text so dangerous it must be hunted like contraband? But ask yourself this: if even the ashes of these scrolls can still rewire how you see life and death, then what would happen to you if a complete text resurfaced? The flesh that remembers. Stand before a mummy and resist the urge to call it dead. What is death when the face remains, the hair shines, the fingerprints endure? 3,000 years separate you, yet the skin persists, refusing to yield to soil. You think you are looking at a corpse, but what if you're staring into an archive? Science has already begun to read them as data. DNA sequences extracted from tissue, genomes reconstructed from brittle bones, parasites cataloged from dried intestines. The mummies whisper not with words, but with molecules. Their blood encodes their diets, their diseases, their migrations. They are case studies of time itself, experiments preserved in flesh. They outlasted empires not through monuments, but through biology. And yet the paradox deepens. If memory is stored in neural patterns, then the preserved brain, shrunken though it may be, is a fossilized library, not functioning perhaps, but imprinted with traces. What if preservation is not passive? What if a mummy is a hard drive in stasis, awaiting the right reader? Already, artificial intelligence can reconstruct faces from bone, simulate voices from fragments of skull resonance, predict health from genetic coding. How long before the whisper becomes audible, before the pharaoh speaks again, not metaphorically but digitally? The horror is not revival, the horror is continuity. Imagine fragments of your body persisting across centuries, sampled, sequenced, revived in simulation. Do you end at the grave, or do you extend into every archive that preserves you? If your cells remain, are you not scattered immortally into databases, laboratories, museums? Death dissolves not into nothing, but into endless duplication. And there is another whisper, darker still. Perhaps this was the plan. To be preserved was to be multiplied. To be embalmed was to ensure future eyes would reopen you, future minds would reconstruct you, future machines would reanimate you. The pharaohs understood what few admit: memory is not personal, memory is viral. Once preserved, it infects all who encounter it. You gaze at the mummy, but the mummy gazes back, rewriting you with its persistence. Biology confirms it. To touch an artifact is to exchange particles, skin cells, microbes. You leave part of yourself in the tomb, and the tomb leaves part of itself in you. Identity is porous. To open a sarcophagus is not observation but contamination. You are not the same after contact, no matter how clinical the tools, no matter how detached the gaze. Museums pretend to neutralize this: glass cases, sterile air, controlled lighting. But glass is illusion. The persistence seeps through. Visitors stand transfixed, silent, haunted. Something ancient rewrites their nervous system. They walk away altered, though they cannot say how. The pharaoh's immortality is not his own body enduring, but his ability to fracture yours. So I ask you now, if the dead can still edit the living, if memory is viral and biology is archive, then what separates your life from theirs? Are you alive because you breathe, or are you only another vessel, waiting to be unwrapped, read, and whispered through across centuries you will never see? The curse that thinks. Curses are dismissed as superstition, footnotes in archaeology, sensational headlines for tourists. The curse of the pharaohs is treated as coincidence, explorers falling ill, excavators vanishing, patrons ruined. Science blames bacteria in sealed tombs or ancient mold inhaled by lungs unprepared for such spores, but reduction misses the essence. The curse was never biological, it was psychological, it was informational, it was designed to infect thought. Read the walls, death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king. These inscriptions are not warnings, they are instructions. The curse works because it makes you imagine death before it arrives, because it installs a feedback loop in the mind. Once you believe you are marked, every symptom becomes confirmation. A cough becomes prophecy, an accident becomes fate. The curse rewires perception, and perception alters biology. The body follows belief into collapse. Modern psychology names this the nocebo effect, the dark twin of placebo. If the mind can heal with suggestion, it can also kill. Clinical studies confirm it. Patients warned of side effects experience them even from sugar pills. A diagnosis can generate symptoms where none existed before. Belief is pathology. The Egyptians knew this millennia ago and sculpted curses as precision weapons of suggestion. But curses do more than kill individuals. They bind generations. A curse installs narrative continuity. Those who trespass will suffer, ensuring that fear itself preserves the tomb. Even long after belief in magic fades, the story lingers. Superstition survives as folklore, folklore as history, history as subconscious imprint. This is immortality through terror, the persistence of narrative across time. The true curse is not that explorers die. The true curse is that even you reading these words now hesitate. Some part of you, however rational, wonders if the act of knowing itself is dangerous. You feel the echo of the warning coil around you. This is how information haunts. The curse does not live in stone, it lives in thought. And there is another layer. Neuroscience shows that memory is contagious, not just through genetics, but through stories. To hear of a curse is to implant it. False memory experiments reveal how easily minds adopt events that never happened. People can be convinced they committed crimes, witnessed disasters, met people who never existed. Memory is not a recording, but a construction, endlessly vulnerable to contamination. So when the priests inscribed curses, they were not only defending tombs. They were colonizing future minds. The irony is chilling. The archaeologist who scoffs at curses, who declares the myth, is already ensnared. By naming it myth, they propagate it further, embedding it in academic texts, documentaries, museum placards. Skepticism is still transmission. The curse thrives equally on belief and disbelief, because in either case it spreads. And perhaps this was always the pharaoh's plan. To survive as thought, not flesh, to endure as narrative, not bone. A body can rot, but a curse can replicate indefinitely. You are not haunted by the mummy in its case. You are haunted by the sentence that entered your mind and refused to leave. The pharaoh remains not as a body in wrappings, but as an algorithm in your nervous system, looping endlessly, whispering, "You are next." So tell me, if thought itself can kill, if words can be engineered to outlive empires, and if the mind cannot distinguish between curse and suggestion, then how do you know that the very sentence you are reading right now is not the continuation of the pharaoh's design? The flesh that speaks without breath. You are told mummification was about immortality of the body, a crude attempt at preserving vessels so the soul could return. But that is a simplification for tourists. In the hidden library, the body is not preserved for the soul. The body is preserved for the living. Mummification was an archive, a cryptographic script written in skin, organs, and resin, a code meant to outlast the mind that carried it. Every organ removed was not random ritual, but symbolic erasure. The brain pulled through the nose was not discarded as useless. It was an act of severance, a statement. Memory is dangerous. Thought must be stripped from the vessel. The heart, the seat of consciousness to the Egyptians, was weighed against a feather. To extract it, wrap it, and return it was not superstition, but calibration. They were reprogramming the human into a message. Chemical analysis of mummies today reveals substances from distant lands. Cedar resin from Lebanon, bitumen from the Dead Sea, cinnamon from Asia. These were not merely preservatives, they were signatures. Each body became a map of trade routes, alliances, cosmologies. Each pharaoh's skin carried the geography of an empire. When you unwrap a mummy, you are not opening a corpse, you are unscrolling a document. Anthropologists now whisper about this without daring to conclude that the wrappings themselves were text. Strips of linen inscribed, folded, layered, so meaning existed not on the surface but in arrangement. Just as DNA encodes life in its spiral, linen encoded meaning in its layers. To unwrap was to decode, to bury was to encrypt. The tomb was not a grave, it was a library. But here lies the paradox. The body preserved is not eternal life, but eternal surveillance. To be embalmed is to be watched forever, frozen in testimony. Even now, CT scans of mummies generate endless data: facial reconstructions, illnesses, diets, ancestry. The pharaohs, in refusing to decay, surrendered privacy. Their curse is to be dissected endlessly, their intimacy mined by strangers. They achieved eternity, but not freedom. Modern neuroscience returns to this question: what is memory when the brain is gone? In split-brain studies, consciousness itself fractures when hemispheres are severed, yet both halves continue to claim I am. In that light, a mummy is another fragment of I am, a continuity of identity outside the brain. We treat the bandaged corpse as artifact, but the artifact insists, I remain a subject, not an object. Perhaps this is why so many who worked on mummies reported being watched. Not cursed, not attacked, but observed. Priests designed the embalmed body not as passive relic, but as mirror. Resin fixes the features into a perpetual stare. The living enter the tomb, gaze upon the sealed eyes, and for the first time sense the inversion. You are no longer the observer, you are the observed. And still deeper, another possibility, that the pharaohs did not believe the soul would return to the body, but that the body itself became the soul. That continuity is not spirit entering matter, but matter itself refusing to yield. A corpse so perfectly preserved forces us to question the boundary between life and death. When flesh does not rot, when features resist time, the binary collapses. Are we seeing a dead king or a life paused mid-sentence waiting for you to complete it? Here is the thought that unsettles most. If the body is code, if wrapping is encryption, then to open a tomb is not robbery. It is decryption, which means that every archaeologist who touched a mummy has been running the pharaoh's program inside their own mind without consent. Every museum visitor who gazes upon the bandaged flesh is processing the message further. And now, by reading this, so are you. So tell me, if mummification was not preservation but transmission, then when you encounter a mummy, are you looking at the dead, or are the dead looking through you, continuing their sentence inside your memory? The tomb that outlives the mind. You have wandered deeper than anyone ever intended, past corridors of gold, shadows that twist, and hieroglyphs that whisper secrets older than memory itself. The boy king's tomb is no longer a place, it is a process. Every chamber, every artifact, every flicker of light has been an experiment, a lens through which your consciousness has been pried, mirrored, fractured, and multiplied. There is no return. The mind you carried in here does not leave intact. For centuries you were told the pharaohs built monuments for death, for faith, for power. But now you understand, they built them for you. The pyramids were not graves but machines, the mummies were not corpses but codes. The texts carved into stone were not prayers but algorithms designed to outlive time and infiltrate the minds of those who would dare to read. You thought you came here to uncover history, but history was the trap. The tomb does not preserve the dead, it preserves you. Every question you asked unraveled another certainty. Every certainty you clung to dissolved into paradox. You thought flesh was mortal, but here it resists decay. You thought memory was housed in the brain, but here it is encrypted in resin and linen. You thought the observer stood apart from the observed, but here you are caught in their gaze, processed by their design. You thought you were studying pharaohs, but pharaohs have been studying you. The whispers of the mummies were never voices of the past. They were instructions carried forward in silence, running through each mind that dared to translate, interpret, or simply stare too long. And now, without realizing it, you have become the vessel. The program has already been installed. The pharaohs did not want to live forever, they wanted to live through you. So ask yourself, with the last shred of self still uncorrupted, when you close this book, when you leave this chamber, when you return to the world that pretends to be normal, will you carry your own mind with you? Or has the tomb already written itself into your thoughts, ensuring that you are no longer yours at all?